Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for taking the time out of your days to join us for this update on a bit of a regulatory change that's now been around for a year or so, and we do appreciate the impacts that it's having on all stakeholders, really. Please take, if anything, to take away from this meeting, that we're very much presenting this as a forum. So by no means a directed way of doing anything. It is very much gathering information on your experience at centre level, from us here at Ascentis, from some of our moderators and our external writers that we work with. So very much an open discussion today, and we're just interested in the feedback that it generates. So as a first port of call, please take into account our Access Development email address there at the bottom. So anything you have to add to this conversation, we're very interested to hear about. So please get in touch with us, whether it's feedback to this presentation or ideas that you have for anything moving forward. We'd be very interested to hear from you. My name is Jack Wilcock, and I'm joined by Stephen McMahon and several members of the Access Development team here this afternoon. I'm also joined by four external subject experts who we've been consulting with for the purpose of this webinar, and also some of the documentation that we already have out there. Those being Jane Statt, Tracy Lambert, Liz Shearer and Hilary Nye, who between them all have, I guess, different stakeholder positions in terms of this, in terms of the numerical marking issue. So we'll be hearing from those four people in turn, each with a different perspective on the issue at hand. I'm just going to briefly talk through an introduction in terms of the regulatory change in general. Then I'm going to hand over to Tracy to talk through documentation that we devised around about a year ago now, in order to provide some guidance for centres, and definitely something that we'll be looking to update in the future. I'd then like to hand to Jane, who's our subject moderator, in particular for SAMS and maths, and she can give you a bit more perspective on how she's been seeing the impact of numerical marking removal. And then finally, we have Liz and Hilary, who are both subject tutors at two of our colleges, to give their perspective on how they've been working at it at centre level and some of the approaches that they've been taking to assessing in a more qualitative way. I did approach the QAA before this webinar in order to gain a bit of feedback on their thoughts of us putting on this webinar. And so I, of course, gave them the opportunity to put forward a statement. And this is what was received, in many respects taking the guise of information that's already out there. And I would recommend staying abreast of this issue by visiting the QAA website. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this statement for the purpose of this webinar. Of course, this webinar is being recorded, so you can return to digest this statement in your own time. But from the QAA perspective, this kind of sets the scene as to the general decision on them taking away numerical marking. So, you know, that thing has happened now. It was enacted as of last year, and so we have been forced to sort of move with the changes. In terms of the context of the overall grade descriptors, of course, you're all aware that we now work with 7 grade descriptors, and historically numerical marking was applied to grade descriptors 1 and 3. So that gives you, just by means of reference to that chart there, it gives you an understanding of the sort of coverage that numerical marking has. And depending on the subject that you have interest in as you join us here today, obviously different grade descriptors have different weighting and use across your respective subjects. So in many ways, our discussion today will probably focus on impact on the STEM subjects, but we would be interested to hear from other subject tutors outside of that area, and really how qualitative marking works in your respective areas. So this is definitely an open forum, and not are not directed at STEM, although I think the issue has kind of necessitated it to start at least at that point. In terms of the overall context, then I think it's worth us just taking a step back and considering the stakeholders involved. Of course, our remit here at Ascent is really within the assessment design and the assignment brief design, whether that's working with you at centre level and moderating your assignments and working with you on the formatting, or perhaps design of the new core unit assessment as well in respective subject sets. So our stakeholder perspective is perhaps geared more towards the assessment design. Of course, there's implications for yourselves at centre level in that the nature of assessment is now going to have to change, moving towards that holistic, qualitative way of looking at things. And of course, we're here to help with that and are here to listen to the discussions and the feedback that you might have to that. And then, of course, we have to consider the nature of the feedback and the standardization, of course, the moderation of all that work. And very much that is something that we have of course have an interest in as well. So I think we each put ourselves somewhere within that diagram, and there may well be different places that I haven't considered as well, but I think it's important for us all to gather here today and to talk about this issue and really just listen to each other on how we're attempting to address it. At this point, I think it's be great to bring in Tracy, and just to set the context, we did develop some guidance documentation for assessing qualitatively around a year ago now. So Tracy, if that's okay, if I could hand over to you to talk through the process that we went through there.
Absolutely. Can you?
I just heard you at the beginning there, Tracy. If you're coming back now. Yeah, I can hear you there. I'm sure if there is any problems with sound or visual, please, if attendees could put a note in the chat and we can attempt to address that. But I think I can hear you now, Tracy.
As long as you can hear me, Jack. I think I've just turned my microphone back on, so
you're back on now. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so when we started to think about non-numerical marking and the sort of guidance we were going to give, I began by thinking about what I would do with if I was approaching marking chemistry in this way. What I would do. I think it's a real challenge to move from the more traditional numerical marking to holistic, more subjective approach. And the key thing for me was to think about how I would be able to standardise the marking and how I would be able to justify the grading decisions that I'd made. So I began by considering the assessment criteria, which assessment criteria lend themselves particularly well to providing opportunities for students to go beyond a pass into merit and distinction. Some lend themselves more to that than others, and thinking about what terms, what processes, what calculations might lead to an indication of that higher level of understanding or application. So we decided to include a brief sort of generic introduction to the approach of non-numerical marking, and to follow that up with some subject-specific examples from chemistry, physics and maths that would demonstrate the possible application of non-numerical marking processes. Now, this is very much guidance, this is very much, exactly that, guidance. We're very interested to get some feedback as to what works for centres and what sort of information would help centres, because it is a challenge to go from a mark scheme, a numerical mark scheme, as I said, to a more sort of subjective, holistic approach. So it would be really useful to know what sort of information centres would find useful, and I came up with some ideas that I thought might help. Maybe we need some guidance on the structure of the assignment briefs, the structure of the assessments, so that there are lots of opportunities, or plenty of opportunities, for students to go beyond pass into merit and distinction for as many of the assessment criteria as that applies to. I think perhaps we need to relook at the structure of our assignment briefs. And leading on from that, I was reminded of a section on the assignment brief that we used to have, which was called What This Means for This Assignment, was the title. And when I was lecturing, I found that that was quite a challenge to fill in. From my point of view, what do you need to get a merit on this assignment for this grading descriptor? What do you need to get a distinction? But actually the students found it really useful, because that's the question they would ask most. What do I need to do to get to a merit? What do I need to do to get to a distinction? So I'm putting it out there that maybe we need to reintroduce that section onto the assignment brief template and give students more information about what they actually need to do to achieve those higher grades. Maybe some more detail in the indicative content. Maybe we could include in the indicative content highlighting topics that could lead to or lend themselves again to extending beyond a pass into merit and distinction. So maybe the indicative content could be used in a more proactive way to give some guidance towards topics that you can use to extend that understanding beyond merit and distinction. And the other thing I thought about was perhaps more information on how to use the grading descriptors, this idea of selecting one component and how important the selection of the component can be, or how significant the selection of the component can be. So those are the thoughts that I've got at the moment about what information we could provide to centres. We certainly also need to think about restructuring exams, I think, to make them more applicable for non-numerical marking. And then what we decided with this document that we've got so far was the generic guidance followed by some specific examples, and there's one on the screen at the moment of this is an assessment criteria in physics with examples of what you would do or what you would look for to allocate or to award merit and distinctions for those different assessment criteria. Now, I don't know how useful exemplar material like that is. It would be really good to get some feedback from you about whether this is the sort of information you need, or whether you need more of what I was talking about before, more sort of structure to the assignment briefs, more information about how to use grading descriptors. Really open to you about what you would find most useful, I think, is really where I'm coming from with this. So that's why we went with the original document, and that's what we're thinking of as we go forward with this. So I'd be very interested for any feedback from today would be much appreciated.
Thanks, Tracy. Really interesting, and thank you for the background on that. Yeah, and I would agree wholeheartedly that any feedback as to that document is useful. I would add in that if I just go back a couple of slides, that this document is available on the login area of the Ascentis website for our customers, and also we can, for those people who are joining us as external non-customers, we can share this with you to have a look at, because we do believe it's a useful document. It's an evolving document as well. We are aware that there are several other AOs that have issued similar guidance as well. So this is available in the login area, the newly formatted login area as well, where we do have several other documents of interest that might help you in your planning for this regulatory change. And just to build on that final point there from Tracy, obviously we've developed this guidance documents more for tutors, but I think you did touch on, Tracy, the idea that we could bring back or work with the what this means for students, or what this means for the assignment box, which was something of a historic way of formatting the assignment briefs. But for an example, I've been working closely with a subject tutor in teaching SAMs, and from a recent submission that the tutor made, we actually decided to build that what this means box back into the grading components box at the end of our assignment brief. So what we have here is qualitative guidance for all, and by that I mean something that a student can see when they're given this assignment at the start of their studies, but it's also something that a tutor might be able to use as a bit of guidance, and really then the student and tutor are both aware of what would be expected of a merit and a distinction level. So very much an evolving document. You could think of it perhaps as a beta assignment brief, let's say, but we'd be keen to know your feedback on these, and whether, you know, wording like this should be closely adhere to the assignment that's in question, or maybe it should be a little bit more generic, or maybe a little bit more specialist. I think it was just something that myself and the tutor worked through, and we decided that it was actually very applicable for this particular assignment brief to just build in those two guidance boxes there to really aid a student in working towards a merit and distinction under the overall aim of not being marked numerically, so driving towards that qualitative assessment. So any feedback on that, be really keen to know, and whether you might see application for it within your respective subject area as well. I'm happy to move the conversation on. Thank you, Tracy, for that update. And Jane, I'd like to bring you in here at this point, if that's okay, to give your perspective from moderation that you've seen over the past year or so.
Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, coming through well, Jane. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say a thank you on behalf of moderators to all of you. I know there wasn't any choice, but for the way that you embraced the change and took on board in lots of different ways, some more creative than others, but doing a grand job. What we thought would be useful would be to have a look at the data to see how the spread of grades this year compared with last year, when numerical marking was still available. Unfortunately, we've kind of jumped the gun, so that data is not yet available. I would have liked to have been able to say there's no difference, you've done a grand job, everything's fine, but unfortunately we don't have that as yet. It wasn't a wasted exercise though, because some interesting facts did come out of looking into the data. Ultimately, both yourselves as tutors and your students are looking to gain merits and distinctions. I can only talk from the point of view of maths, which is the data that we've looked at. But as I say, it has brought up some interesting aspects. It was clear that the most distinctions came from 3 units. The first 2 are calculus and the nature of functions. What can we learn from this? I think, looking at those units, they're short, focused units which lend themselves to a very specific type of assessment brief. There would be a distinct lack of wraparound in terms of words, which we all know, words, not numbers, are barriers to achievement when it comes to maths. So I think for those 2, calculus and the functions, that didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was that the 3rd unit that generated the most distinctions was the old DCU, the exam. So looking a little bit deeper into that, as to how that worked. And what we found was that most of the students sat the alternative assessment. There were 243 students who sat the alternative assessment, as opposed to just 27 students who sat the controlled assessment. Of those students, 84% who took the alternative assessment achieved a merit or a distinction, as opposed to 52% who took the controlled assessment. So looking at those outcomes, and that's what we're primarily here to promote, is positive outcomes. I think what we can see from this is that our students respond better in a situation where they are not confronted by an exam. What can we learn from this? We've learned already. Exams have gone. So although we've lost numerical marking, we've also lost exams. So that's a positive. And we've seen that in the impact and the outcomes. The other thing that has been a challenge to both students and to tutors when they come to assess has been the section B, or the optional questions. That has also been removed. So that should make a smoother path moving forward. So although we don't have hard facts to compare from previous years, already we're taking on board things which are becoming apparent, and those have already been put into place for the future. So no more exams and no more optional questions. So moving forward, how can we use this information and arrive at grades which reflect the achievement of our learners, and hopefully to do so with as little angst on the part of the tutors? I do think the Ascentis guidance document is a starting point. I hope that you will find that too. It will be of great assistance to some people, for others maybe not, but please do look at it. Even if you take away just one thing that's useful, then that will be good. I think certainly as mathematicians, when we're devising a method which works for ourselves as assessors and for our students, then the first point has to be a mark scheme, and that is supplied for you, so that's not a problem. What you then do with that mark scheme is an individual choice. I've used the word spreadsheet. I don't actually mean a spreadsheet, but some form of recording, so that as you are using the mark scheme and you're going through the answers and the achievements of your students, you are recording in some way what they have achieved. Everybody's going to do that differently. What I think you also have to bear in mind is the prior knowledge of your student. You will know if they're having a good day, a bad day, what their capabilities are. And I think it is important, now that we've moved to qualitative marking, that we take that into account. That will form the basis, along with their achievement, for your personal, professional judgments in arriving at that grade. I would say that most of us know a pass student. Most of us know a distinction student. It's the bit in the middle that causes the problems. Now, previously, when we had numerical marking, we had a wonderful tool that assisted us in those tricky areas between the grades. Don't have that anymore. In my experience, and it is only 1 year, so, please treat this with a little bit of caution, I probably detected a reluctance on the part of some centres to award distinctions as opposed to a merit. there was a little bit of a fallback into a merit when people weren't sure. I understand the reasons why, but please, go with what you believe. Don't feel that you've got to hang back. If you can justify it, and that's the important part, how you justify it, then go with what you believe, your professional, personal judgment. Of course, it's always good to share. And if you are working alongside other tutors, then to standardise and share good practice is worth its weight in gold. That is where you will be able to discuss these tricky decisions and arrive at a judgment which you will feel happy with, confident with. If you don't have anyone else who is delivering the maths units or the SAMS units, then maybe that you could standardise with another colleague who would be prepared to come in, look at a couple of pieces of work, discuss it with you, and out of this you could derive good practice, and hopefully you would feel a lot more confident in moving forward. Those are just a few suggestions from a moderator perspective. It doesn't solve all of the issues, and certainly if anyone's got any suggestions or any questions, then I'm more than happy to assist if I can.
Thanks, Jane. Lovely. Some really pertinent points there, and from our perspective at Ascentis, couldn't be in more agreement, really. And I agree. A shame that we couldn't get the data that we needed, but time will tell with that, and I think it's worth us revisiting that. And perhaps yourselves at centre level that haven't been mindful of data and indeed conversations, sharing good practice, perhaps speaking between departments as well on how you're approaching this, whether it's the methods that you're taking, how you're recording things. Talking about students that you might share between departments as well. So some really interesting points there. And like Jane says, and I would echo it, in that we're not promoting a certain way of working here. These are very much ideas that we've been thinking about, and Jane, of course, has picked up from conversations with centres, and likewise Tracy has brought to the fore from her experience as well. So please take away from this that we're not trying to, I guess, get across a certain way of working with this regulation. We're staying on time. Thank you very much to Jane and Tracy so far. We may well have some question time right at the end if we stay on track. So I'm just conscious that obviously people might be looking at this in their lunch breaks, and we can move now on to Liz, who's joining us as a tutor from Farnborough College, and who's going to talk us through some of the approaches she's made to looking at her learners' work and making those distinctions between pass, merit and distinction. Good afternoon, Liz. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon. Yes, I
Hi,
can hear.
Liz.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Brilliant. Okay. Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, go for it. Just tell me when you want me to advance, Liz.
Okay. Yeah. So I also teach the A-level maths at the college. So this year was quite interesting because of the non-exams there, and I got a lot of help from all sorts of directions. But I have to say, as Jane said, I tended to know my students, know what they're capable of, and a lot of things are based on that, I think, in a way, although they have to do the work. Yes, so I had, it wasn't, even the A-levels were not just numerical marking, they gave us a lot of exemplars to say this is what an A should look like, this is what a B should look like. So, with that in mind as well, I sort of looked at the students' work. Do you want to go to the next slide? Sorry, thank you. Okay, so this is one of the past students. Now, I don't know, some of you might recognise the question. The student hasn't attempted the first question, and she's put a random thing down as positive correlation. I'm sorry for those that are chemistry, not math. positive correlation here, which isn't anything, isn't the right answer. And she's also done this question 11. It's arithmetic progression question. She's done it perfect, got the right answer. So numerically, you probably would have given her full marks, but actually, she's just counted up. She hasn't used any formulas. She hasn't used any advanced methods at all, and she was a pass student. Beautifully, really nice looking, answer, but she hasn't used any of the methods that were taught. So she is a pass student. Sorry, do you want the next one? Right. Next slide, please. Okay. Here we've got a merit student, quite a good student. She has attempted everything. It looks much messier than the past student, but she's got 1 out of 3 of these correct. She understands the question that's been asked. She hasn't answered it correctly, but she has understood, and she has given an explanation. And on this one, the arithmetic progression, she has attempted to set up the equations using formula, but she failed to set up both equations and has just left it unfinished. So I would say that that's sort of the bottom end of the merit. Thank you. Have the next one, please. And here we have a distinction student. Now, when I first marked this paper, I had just marked a brilliant distinction student, and I thought, oh, that's just a merit. But I rethought it and thought, no, actually, he's or she has done 2/3 of that one correctly, can recognise the graph, hasn't done an explanation, probably didn't read the question properly, and he's done the arithmetic progression, but made a stupid arithmetic error where he subtracted 2 numbers and got the wrong one, got 8 instead of 6. So, and again, with just numerical marking, he wouldn't be, you might mark that question down and he's actually done it in his head. Okay, so the next one, please. And this was a really good distinction question, who's actually still made a mistake in the arithmetic progression question, just an arithmetic error. And again, under numerical marking, you wouldn't have given him credit for that probably, but he's set up all the equations properly, he's used the formula, and then he's just got a wrong number somewhere. I think you have a look at that. And it's just a transcription error on that one, really, putting the wrong number down again. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I can't remember if there's any further slides there.
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Some really interesting points there, and it's lovely actually to see some learner work, because let's face it, at the end of it, it's all about the learner progression and how we're adapting our practice to learner work. So lovely to see that, and thank you for sharing that. And to talking through your process, and I think it harks back to perhaps that diagram right at the beginning. We're working around that diagram and each particular individual's perspective on how they're reacting to this. And I would add that the question in question, let's say, is from the old DCU, or now the core unit as we're referring to it. And also to build on Jane's point as well, that it has and will be going through a bit of a redesign to try and adapt to some of these changes as well. So all of these things considered, we can look at student work now and try and adapt our process. And of course, we can take this on board as feedback and your feedback from centre level to enter into a bit of a redesign of our assessments. And here at Ascendis, we do recognise that some things aren't quite up to par. They've perhaps been set up for different purposes. That's, with reference to the old TCA and alternative assessment style. Of course, as Jane said, we've now removed the formal exams, so they are taking on more of that alternative assessment approach, whereby it could be argued that students don't feel that pressure within a time-constrained environment. Of course, everybody has their opinion on that, and the positives and negatives of formal exams. I would add that the core unit assessments that we have for all our subject sets you can still deliver those in time-controlled environments if you want to, but that is very much up to your, that's your decision at centre level. We will be supportive of that, but we haven't necessarily written them to be mandated by a time constraint or indeed a sort of formalised experience. But thank you, Liz. I don't know if there were any questions at this point, because we do find ourselves a little bit ahead of time, and I'd like to give the stage to Hilary next. But if there was anything perhaps directed for, well, for Tracy, Jane or Liz at this stage, please let us know. If you can put your hand up or a message in the chat. I can't quite see when people raise their hands on my screen, at least, but I don't know if anything's come in. That's fine. I think just at this point, just pausing for a reflection, really, and digesting what we've seen. By all means, you know, watching this today, you might be thinking of ideas that you might like to bring to the table for us to talk about. Maybe you'd like us to run something similar within perhaps a different area of STEM. I realise we have been quite maths heavy, so apologies to non-math specialists, but you know, I think that it is a pertinent point that it does have a lot of application. Qualitative assessment has a lot of issue within SAMS and maths. And thank you, Pam. I'm just going to, I believe that's Pam. I'm just going to read that question from the side, just so I don't bring it up. Thank you, Pam. The guidance that Jane illustrated, we use as marking guidance for tutors in relation to all of the ACs in biology. Well, that's great. Thank you, Pam, that's getting through to centre level. And indeed, any feedback you have on that, Pam, from your tutors and yourself, you know, we can build that into any updates. We recognise these documents as very much evolving, so you know, we can move to version 2, version 3 if we need to, and likewise anybody from to give a perspective from a certain subject, we'd welcome that feedback, and of course we can work with you on wording towards that. So the marking guidance has got a few a few subjects covered, but of course we're always open to have more coverage in there. I don't know if there was any other further questions at this point, but good to know it's getting to centre level. Thank you, Pam. Okay, great. Probably a nice point to move on and give the stage to Hilary. And again, Hilary is a tutor delivering maths at City of Bristol College. And again, Hilary, if you're able to lead us through your approach to how you assess qualitatively, that'd be brilliant if you can hear us.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, coming through nicely. Thanks, Hilary. If you want me, just tell me when to click through and I can follow through on the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Jack.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the way that I've been managing the assessment for maths for a number of years. It was evolved together with a colleague over several years, and we started off with something that's pretty similar to what I'm going to show you now, but it did get honed while we worked together. She subsequently left, so I'm on my own doing it, but I had a good sort of 4 years working together alongside with her. I should say at this point that I don't come from a background of A-level maths. So I don't have the mark scheme and the pass mark and the grade boundaries kind of very not constraining me. So I do come from a different place, perhaps. So what I'm going to talk you through is what I do, and it seems to lend itself relatively easily to this movement towards non-numerical marking, which could be handy. It's handy for me. So the things I'm going to talk you through is the assessment paper, the marking, which is essential to it, to the whole structure, the process of handback and resubs, which is unique in a way, it's different, and how I use the grading descriptors. So maybe could you move on, Jack, next to the next bit? I want to say that sort of the premise, the whole point of this is to arrive at a final grade that basically gives students who can do it a pass, and then a merit student is actually picking it up and running with it, maybe with a few glitches here and there, but has basically learnt the teaching on that unit, actually being able to use it a bit. And distinction, as you say, you can recognise these, the ones who've really mastered the techniques. And with a few glitches, perhaps with numerical slips here and there, but basically the methods are pretty solid. Could we move on? The first thing here is the assessment paper, which is very distinctly in two parts. The first part with shorter questions. They're pretty straightforward. They're designed to enable the student to evidence that they can achieve those assessment criteria. There may be typically 10 and 12, I don't know, they're different papers, but not an enormous number of questions. And then there's a second section, which is extension questions, typically about 3, not many, 3, they could have parts A and B. And these are more open questions where they will need to use the techniques that are involved in that unit. But it's more up to them to choose how they're going to apply them. Generally, they're A-level questions. And we do this as a timed assessment. I've put typically 1.5 hours. It's sometimes 2 hours. I'm not particularly keen on them being up against the clock. That's not really the point. I want to see what they can do. So that's time now to move on, please. Oh yes, this is a really important bit. Thank you, Jack. Yeah, the first section, resubs can be done. Second section, they can't. And I'll explain more about that. Also, I think I should say that the grading that's done is done on the initial thing that the student hands in at the end of their assessment. Make more sense in a minute, I think. We move on. Okay, here's just a quick look at a typical front sheet. This is from a further algebra unit, I think. This one is just to show you that the assessment criteria down in the column on the left are mapped to questions. And it's quite often one question to one assessment criteria, but it doesn't have to be. It could be one question to more than one assessment criteria, as with question 4 near the top there, or it could be a single question, sorry, one question to a single assessment criteria. More than one question to a single assessment criteria, as you've got near and 4.3 at the bottom there, you've got questions 7 and 8 there. Could we move on? So here we get to the marking of this, and the first section, basically looking to see if they've got it right, it's ticked. If it's not, it could be for all manner of reasons, and I keep track of that on my spreadsheet. I've got, per student, per question, I keep track. I've got little codes of what's what to myself. But we got anything from numeric slips, sign slips, fundamentally gone off on the wrong method, the severity of the slip. Some slips are really little, some are bigger, and then of course if they've just missed the question out altogether. So that's all kept track of on this spreadsheet of mine. Ultimately, all questions in that first section need to be correct for them to pass this unit. But of course, that's not always what happened in that initial assessment session. Then we have the extension questions, and I would say that I would mark them quite similar, Liz, to the way you were presenting you did then. I would mark the first section similar too. I'm looking at someone who's made a little slip with the numbers is nowhere near the same kind of mistake as someone who has just not really got the right end of the stick with the question all through this marking. Turning though to the extension question section, I can, you know, give as much feedback as I want there. I can point out where things have gone right, where things have gone wrong, whether there could have been a more efficient way of doing something, etc. Okay, if we could move on, please. We then come to the handback session once all the marking's been, and got there that this is under exam conditions. I mean by that, you know, they're spread out, they don't have their phones, etc. They're just, you know, them. And they look through the paper that's been given back. The assessment criteria questions can be sorted out. And they would look at those, and if they can, there and then address corrections. I hate that word, but I'll come up with a better one that summarises what I'm after here. But, you know, where they've just put 4 and they meant 5 or something, they're going to see that. My marking hasn't told them what's wrong. It's just said, yes, fully right. But a lot of things are ironed out at that point. So this is almost like kind of stage 2 of the assessment process. They do it clearly. I have my spreadsheet to refer back to. You know, I mean, I know what the original submission was, but they do these corrections clearly. Usually, I mean, adopted lately is giving them plain paper, whereas the original assessment was done on lined paper. They got plain paper. They use a different pen. It's very clear what is this second attempt. And by and large, a lot of things get sorted out there. I suppose it's a more relaxed setting, but they are spread out. If they can't sort the question out, then they agree with me there and then. Okay, so they're going to go off and learn how to do that topic, and we'll reconvene a week later to do a different question on the same topic, and that's where what I would term a resub. But ultimately, we're looking for all those assessment criteria on the checklist, getting everything ticked off to achieve a pass. The extension questions, which they've got in the handbag, they can't be changed. That's, you know, what happened on the day is they have. So even if they look at it now, having talked to the others, of course, and say, but I know what I should have done. That's great, but that's not going to change the grading of that assessment. Jack, could we go on, please? Okay, so using these grading descriptors, I'm taking for an example here an assessment that's assessed on grading descriptors 1, 3, and 7. They're not all done that way, I know, but you can use, or I use, different sets of grading descriptors in a similar way. I pick one, which is essentially, in here, the grading descriptor 1, which is about understanding. That is only graded on what happens with those extension questions. Those questions are the more open-ended. They're there for the student to demonstrate their understanding, whereas the assessment criteria questions in the first part, you know, you can do them. So that's quite key to this whole process, actually. Having done that, then there are 2 other grading descriptors for which I assess the whole paper. And it's the original submission. It's not what happened to achieve all the ticked boxes. It's the original submission. So for that, for arriving at whether I give a pass merit distinction for those ones, for instance, application of skill, that would be, I'd be taking into account the method, but also the notation and the accuracy of doing it, the thoroughness of doing it. For instance, I'm thinking Liz is one where the student had worked out the next numbers in the series, but hadn't actually used the, that would all be taken into account. So that's all quite quite qualitative, where someone's style of writing down, they haven't used equal signs where they need, or they've used them where they don't need them, or in a calculus paper where the calculus notation isn't quite as it should be. All that's taken into account. And the quality, again, that similar. You'll but similarly, I'm taking into the whole thing. And yes, I suppose what I know about the student, though I'm quite open to being surprised by students pulling it out of the bag when I didn't quite know they would. That's also okay. Let's move on now. Right. Now this might look daunting, this diagram here. I've run it past. I actually ran this little thing through past my own students yesterday to see, and they said yes, it was confusing, but once you explained it, Hilary, yeah, I got the diagram. So let's try. So if you can see, this is if you look at the left-hand column here, one that is for grading descriptor 1, and it's looking just at the extension questions. That's looking for understanding of the subject. Now, I'm saying you've got 3 passes there, but it's really just because I'm sort of splitting it apart so we can look at different scenarios. For those extension questions, there will be students who didn't even attempt them. Okay, they get a pass. They're not going to move up into a merit distinction for that. Someone who's done those, but again, not very well, again, pass for that. Even okay to good, I would say pass for that. Very good. Now, in the old days, like last year, 2-3 years ago, we could talk about percentages here, and I would be the guideline was say 60% to get a merit and 80% to get a distinction. But I should say, we never even had a formal marking scheme, so quite often we were finding a number which kind of fitted into the bracket it should be in. More about that if people want. Have I said that with the extension questions, I've only got 3 questions to be looking at. So it's actually not too difficult to look at the 3 and arrive at the right grade. You're looking for a distinction student will be one who's done all 3 of them probably pretty well, with it all very well, using the right methods at the right times and notating it well, and maybe some numerical glitches here and there, but fundamentally you can tell they've got it. And 3 questions is quite different to hold in your head than if you've 20 questions trying to arrive at whether that student has really got it. Quite fundamental to it. Okay, so having decided what they get for that grading descriptor 1, we're then looking at grading descriptor 3. Now, I hope this maybe is clear. I don't know. Someone who's not attempted the extension questions. Now, I would be all in favour of that, what this means for this assignment thing coming back, because I use it a lot here. We're saying that for what this means for this assignment, to get a merit or a distinction in applications of skills, it means that most of the questions are very good or all of them are excellent. Now that's pretty squidgy, because what about if all of them are very good? But that's a matter for judgment. A student who hasn't attempted the extension questions can't have demonstrated good use of skills throughout the whole paper because they haven't even done the whole paper. So that's going to stay at a pass, and the 3rd descriptor will be a pass as well for the same sort of logic. Someone who's done the extension questions and not got very far with them. However, they have, they're off the ground, and the notation could be very good. They could have done pretty well on all the assessment criteria questions at the beginning, but just not managed with the extension questions. However, using good notation and then a start. And so for that, they could get a merit for that descriptor, but they wouldn't have sufficient to get a merit for the quality one. However, if they've done better than that, you can see that you could have achieved a pass in your extension questions, but get a merit for the rest of it and end up with a merit. So it's not all dependent on those extension questions. So you do have to get somewhere with them. Doing merit standard in the extension questions, anything could happen for the notation, I would say. Although I would find it, as in, if you could get a pass, a merit, or a distinction for that, I would find it quite hard to give that student a distinction for the quality, because they hadn't demonstrated excellent understanding. So even if they'd done really well with the assessment criteria and got most, nearly everything right first time through, I would find that a hard one, and I think it has happened, but it's a fair one. And I hope you understand the format of my little chart here by now, so that you can see that for the someone who's got distinction, the extension questions right at the bottom row here, could end up with a DDD or a DMM, which would be a merit ultimately. That has happened. So someone who's got those extension questions really well, but who had an awful lot of glitches in their assessment criteria stuff, could well be a DMM distinction end of it all. I'm very willing to answer questions on that. So here we go. The end result of all of that is to arrive at the right grade for that student.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Hilary. And we've arrived really at the end of our session today. And hopefully that's given you a flavour, some ideas, some discussion points for yourself personally, or maybe to take back to centre discussions. And thank you to Liz and Hilary for sharing that practice that you know, I think shares a lot of things between you, but of course, you know, you both have your own sets of students which you obviously know very well. In addition, and yeah, I would say, to back up your point there, we too would be willing to hear any questions or points you had against well, anything you've seen today, or anything that you would like to see as well. So by means of just wrapping up, because I am conscious of time, any feedback you have to this, please get in touch with us at the Access Development email if you can, please, because that will find its way to us a bit quicker than just the development email. So accessdevelopment@ascentis.co.uk. So really, any ideas you have for future webinars that we can run in this way, maybe to make them a bit longer if you feel like you would benefit from something a bit more in depth. Any documentation and guidance that you might like us to consider and work on, and whether you would be interested in being involved in that development as well, because we do use the services of you as tutors at centre level in order to help build these documents, because we are very much not the subject experts here at Ascentis. We want to use your experience to build those documents. And dare I say, you know, let's get towards some in-person events. Maybe they can be a series of webinars that do eventually build into something where we can all meet around a big table and talk through some documents and really discuss this in greater depth. So I'd like to think that perhaps this session might build into something a bit bigger, and we'd definitely like to revisit this in terms of the data, as Jane said earlier. Maybe we might be sitting here in a year's time and really talking about that data impact that may or may not be there. But likewise, within that time, if you would like to see further events, then please get in touch. The chat will be continuing on this MS Teams link after this session, so I'm going to end the recording at this point and end the meeting, but please post up any further comments, because we will be able to see that within the chat, and we can of course take that into account for further planning and anything we might want to communicate to all the attendees. This meeting has been recorded as well. We'll put that together and issue that back to you at centre level, and of course you can cascade that to your relevant teams again. Thanks to our 4 presenters today, Tracy, Jane, Liz and Hilary. Many thanks for your input and the time that you've taken to prepare for this meeting as well. That's really appreciated, and hopefully for yourselves joining externally today, that you've got something from it and you take away a bit more of an idea about what this is all about. But please get in touch if you want to be involved in something like this in the future. Okay, many thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your days, and we look forward to hearing from you very soon.